Welcome to Psychic Bent. My name is Carrie.
And I'm Kim. We are two sisters wanting to help other psychics learn and grow in their abilities and to help educate about spirits, angels, and everything psychic. Hi everyone, welcome back to Psychic Bent. Today we have a very interesting episode that we're going to be doing. We're going to be interviewing our sister Julie, who happens to be a practicing psychic medium. She has been out of the country for a bit, and we're really happy to have her here so that we can discuss and reminisce about our times growing up. And really, I think this is the first time that we've ever sat down as sisters to really discuss our psychic abilities together. What do you think, Carrie?
It took us long enough.
Yeah.
It took us long enough.
It did. So welcome, Julie.
Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Why don't we start with, what was it like for you as a child? Did you know what was happening the whole time? What was it like?
I did not know what was happening as a child. I knew that when I went to bed at night, there were people lined up at the foot of my bed wanting help, but I didn't know what to do. They would sit at the foot of my bed and touch my leg. I would scream for my mom. My mom would come, tell me there weren't people there when I knew that there were. So there was a lot of confusion and that sort of thing. But I did not know what was going on when I was a kid.
How did you know they were asking for help? Did they talk to you?
They did talk to me. They would say, "Help, can you help me?" Or "Help me." And I would be like, "Mom!" I didn't know how to help. I didn't want to help. I didn't understand what was going on. So when Mom came in the room, she didn't see them and would turn the light back off and say, there's nobody there. And there would be people lined up.
Carrie, is that something you experienced as a child?
No, I didn't have people lining up in my room, thank goodness. That's something I did not experience. But I think Julie's mediumship was wide open from day one. You know how some psychics are just wide open when they're born?
Yeah.
I think her mediumship was more than likely wide open, obviously, if she's seeing at a young age, people lined up at her bed.
Yeah, I know. I was young, like 6 and 7 years old when that was happening. So I was very young.
So tell us more about how it was as a child and how did it affect you?
I always felt a little different because I learned at an early age that this didn't happen to everyone. So you kind of learn to keep quiet and not do your quote unquote parlor tricks in front of everybody. But there's a lot of depression associated with it because you can't be who you are, even as a young child. Like I said, I saw dead people from an early age. So being out in public and seeing dead people was always a little intimidating and frightening because you don't necessarily see them just at nighttime. You see them in the daytime. And they were always wanting help, trying to give me information, but they never gave me enough information to help them. So there wasn't anything you could do even as you got older to help them in the long run. And as a teenager, it was even harder because once the hormones became involved and a little more crazy, so did the psychic ability.
Carrie, how did that work for you? Was that the same for you? And except for the dead people, of course.
Well, when I got to high school, I tried to tone down the abilities. I guess I learned a balance just growing up on, when to show it, when not to show it. During high school years, people, I still had people coming up and telling me things and, sharing things and doing that kind of psychic stuff. But I didn't want to see anything in the school because I felt the high school was very haunted and I didn't want to see anything. So I tried to be shut off as much as possible at school.
Yeah, that was the same for me too.
Was it the same for you?
Yeah.
For me in the 20s, it kind of reared up again. And then I went through a period where I closed it off.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as we talked about in previous episodes, that's not a good thing to do. Not very healthy. Julie, what made you basically come out of the psychic closet, so to speak? Or did you ever go into the psychic closet? I mean, because there was a long period where this was never, we never discussed this. And then all of a sudden you started like, you're an empath, right? And I'm like, what? So when did you decide that, you know what, this is me. I'm just going to be out there. What made you do that?
Well, there was a long period of time where I was closed off, and I think that's because I was in the healthcare, worked in the healthcare field, where you're constantly barraged with people in pain, people in a lot of fear, people dying, and that really weighs on a person, especially if they're an empath or a medium, because there's just that barrage of emotion. So while I worked in the healthcare field, I really dampened that down. And then through a relationship where that was really frowned upon, added a lot more dampening down of the psychic ability. So I just really learned to live with it, being in a place where you just didn't do it. You didn't live it, you didn't think about it. So it ended up taking a big physical toll on me emotionally and physically.
I can imagine so, especially as haunted as hospitals are.
Yes, hospitals are, a lot of people don't think about it, but hospitals are probably the most haunted area you can go into because you have people dying on a daily basis. You have people being born, and not that that makes something haunted, but any place where there's a lot of high emotion is going to be a place where there's a lot of haunting. So there was, when people die, there's a lot of a huge emotional outpouring when someone passes away. So it's just a huge, huge area of haunting. So it took a toll on me with depression and finally, eventually, alcoholism and that sort of thing. And you asked when I decided to come out of the closet, so to speak, what was a self-imposed isolation was more than really a closet, was when I started listening to my spirit guides again, and they started telling me what I needed to do to get myself back to where I needed to be. And one of them was you need to stop drinking, and you need to start listening more to spirit, and you need to start really getting yourself right. And once I did that, it's like my powers came back, if you want to call them powers, whatever you want to call them, started coming back in full force, and I was able to do my psychic mediumship and be able to do what I needed to do to help other people.
So just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, what's the funniest thing that's ever happened to you as a psychic medium?
One of the funniest things that ever happened to me is not so much what happens to me, but happens to my husband when I do a reading. There's been times, and I don't often do this in public, but there's been times when spirit has overcome me and said, you need to do this reading and you need to do it on this person now. We were on a vacation and we were getting a couples massage, and I really had to read this person, and I said, I'm a psychic medium, and I hear, oh my God, from my husband. And I start to read this person, and she ends up in tears, and he's like, this happens all the time. He just rolls his eyes, and he was buying tennis shoes, and he was doing a lap around the place, and he comes back, and the person who was helping him, the woman who was helping him with tennis shoes, is in tears, and he's like, oh my God.
You've done it again.
You've done it again. So it's more that type of thing.
Here we go.
Yeah, it's more that type of thing where it's more his reaction to what I'm doing than something that's going on at the time. I can't recall a funny reading or something, but it's more him going, oh my God.
Well, you do have a spirit guide that's a little sarcastic.
I do have a spirit guide that is kind of sarcastic. I am trying to lose weight, and I had a particularly bad day where I wasn't following my diet at all, and I got on the scale, and the scale was reading that I had a particularly bad day and wasn't following my diet as well. And I said something to him, and my spirit guide, and I said something about the diet, and he goes, well, I'm not a miracle worker. And I just busted out laughing. So he's done several things like that, said pretty snide remarks, which is really funny because it fits right into our family sense of humor. So he gets me, and he knows how to get my attention, but he's really kind of funny.
How about yours, Carrie?
I don't have a funny one. Mine are pretty serious. I just kind of like need to borrow Julie's on occasion, evidently. But I mean, the way that he communicates with you, because you're probably very upset about the weight thing.
Well, I was disappointed.
Right. And he was talking to you in a way that kind of snapped you out of it.
Yeah, I laughed out loud. Anybody that would have been
Yeah.
around me at the time, well, I was by myself, fortunately, but anybody that was around me would have thought I had mental health issues because I just started laughing loudly out of the blue.
Yeah. Well, Kim, what about you with your spirit guides? Do you have a funny one?
Um, I don't know that I have a funny one, no. But I don't know if my spirit guides are male or female yet. They're more or less me talking in my head. You know what I'm saying? They're more or less, because that's probably how I accept it right now, is my voice in my head rather than an individual. Does that make sense?
So you hear a voice, and it sounds like your voice when it
Yes,
comes through to you, or okay,
yes, yes. Yeah.
interesting. I have male voices that come through for me, so mine are male. I think they could be whatever they want to be.
I think mine is communicating with me because of my left-brained ism.
I think that's perfectly normal the way that you're hearing your spirit guide. I think that they communicate
Yeah.
that way a lot of times with people. And then as you get more familiar with them, then you'll hear the other voice,
Mm,
or other voices. But I think that's very normal.
mm. Cool. I'm
Yeah, I
normal.
don't think they want to freak you out.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm saying. I think it's the effective way to communicate to me because of the left brain thinking that I'm always doing.
Yeah, we've spoken in the episode of psychic etiquette about just because you get a hit, you shouldn't share it. And because it's some things you're like, oh, okay. I think it's just spirit letting you know about that particular person. And we've talked about how you can hear thoughts on occasion. So do you find, Julie, that you have a lot of hits that you have to kind of like go, okay, good to know, and just kind of move on? Or do you get that a lot? Or have you just trained yourself to be like, that's not important, move on?
I do get that a lot. And I have had to train myself to say, okay, that's interesting, move on. But there are times when I get an overwhelming sense that I need to address it. And I do. I think and psychic etiquette is extremely important, but there are times when spirit overrides that and tells you you really need to address that with this person because there's a need.
Yeah, spirit does get pushy sometimes.
Spirit does get very pushy. And with me, because a lot of my work happens to be grief related, that there is a need in that area that they get extremely pushy. So I don't just usually pop off and say, oh, by the way, Spirit wants me to tell you this every time I get a hit. It's very pushy if I do that.
Yeah, I know because you know I try not to just be out there going around and doing stuff, but when spirit gets pushy, it's really difficult to resist because it's such a need that you have to say it. It's very important.
That's true. When Spirit is really laying something on your heart, so to speak, to say something, that person really needs to hear it at that moment.
I agree. Now, Kim, you don't really like to have spirit get pushy, do you?
No, I don't like anybody getting pushy with me, but especially spirit. At least not right now.
I don't think Kim's ready for communicating and passing on messages yet, are you?
I have done it, but I'm not comfortable with it yet, I guess.
And that may not be your gift.
Right.
Exactly.
So you have to kind of grow in your journey and find out what your gift is.
Right.
But you have to be willing to step out of the closet to do that.
Yes.
She
Right.
keeps that one foot in.
I say, on a positive note, I have one foot out. So there we go.
That is a positive note.
As she straddles the doorway. So, on an unrelated note, I have a one-legged crow outside my window, hopping around.
Oh, it's back?
Yeah, it's back. Hadn't
Wow.
seen it in a while. Yeah. So, unrelated. So, Julie, tell us. I mean, obviously, you're prepared. You've prepared some material for the podcast, but tell us something that maybe we don't know about your abilities. Because like we spoke about before, we all three have different abilities, and one's not better than the other. They're just different, and that's what we do. But because Kim and I have talked about how I on occasion can hear people's thoughts, and Kim has on occasion been able to move something, with her mind. So what is there anything that we don't know about that you can do that you're willing to share?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about it. I can read people's thoughts on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
Can't move things with my mind, but I do communicate with spirit pretty easily. When I communicate with them during my readings, I get a lot of information. I tend to be pretty accurate. Now, nobody is 100% accurate. If they are, they're either done a lot of research on you before the reading, or you've told them everything they needed to know while you're sitting there talking, and they're just regurgitating the information.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
But I do tend to be pretty accurate. One thing I can do is hold somebody's hand and do a psychic run around the body and tell them what's going on medically in their body, what I might find spiritually going on medically in their body, if that makes sense. I see colors, red, yellow, and green, that tell me medically what might be going on, if there's something going on with their thyroid, if there's something going on with their lungs, their heart, back, that sort of thing I can see by holding onto their hands when I'm doing a reading. I can dream things that happen on occasion. And you put me on the spot, so I'm really trying to think what else I can do.
Do you see auras?
I do not see auras per se, but I pick up on people if they are good people, bad people, trying to pull the wool over your eyes people, just by sensing them, by just coming up and on the first meeting I can tell if there's somebody who can be trusted, if they're an honest person, if they're not an honest person, if you need to be really weary of them beyond what's just considered a first impression.
Right, yeah. I do that too.
Yeah.
It's made some...
Yeah, that's a good spidey sense to have.
Yeah, it's made for some very uncomfortable situations, though.
And it can. It can.
Because you can't trust them, and nobody around you should trust them, and yet they're trusting them.
Yeah.
As you can't control what other people do, like someone else is trusting them. Maybe that's part of their life lesson. They're supposed to encounter this person to get them to learn something.
True.
Very good point.
We've all had situations where we've tried to warn someone close to us, that's not a good thing. This is going to turn out bad. And they forget they're talking to the psychic, and they're like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. And then pretty soon down the road, like, okay, yeah, you were right. But maybe they had to do that to learn some lesson.
What are your thoughts? What do you think?
I was just going to say that's a very good point. You have to be nice to them because there are other lessons for people to be learned by people, and you know the truth, but you can't just go off and spurt the truth all the time. Like, you can't say that person can't be trusted because somebody has to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes sense.
So, Julie, Kim and I had talked about this on a prior podcast about how, just like that, people close to you, you do tell them things and they don't listen. How aggravating is that for you, and how commonly does it happen for you? I mean, because I know anytime you're in a relationship with someone, they seem to forget that you're psychic, or they, or they don't believe you, and then you tell them this, and this, and they're like, nah, and it happens. I mean, does that happen to you a lot?
It does happen to me a lot, and it can be frustrating. But my husband has a great phrase that he likes to say, and he says, you can't get upset because they're not in your hula hoop, meaning they're not in your circle. So they're not in your circle of knowledge. So you have to let people make their own mistakes, is what it means. Yes. So you can tell them, but they've got to learn it on their own.
Yeah.
So you can be as frustrated as you want to be, but they've got to learn it for themselves.
Yeah, I kind of use the phrase, stay in my own lane. It's like, I'm just going to stay in my own lane and keep on down the highway. Kim said, I know, Kim, that's happened to you quite a few times.
Oh, yeah. You just have to learn to...
It gets amusing sometimes, though.
How so?
Well, I mean, you know what you know. You're being told. And then they're so adamant. And it's just kind of like, all right, let's see what happens, With my ex-husband, I got a lot. Okay, you were right. And that it started to get amusing because it's like, spidey senses are talking here. You should listen. So it became amusing only because, yeah, I know it was right. But part of my thing is I find humor in a lot of things that maybe other people don't. But he had to learn his lessons, and one of the lessons wasn't to listen to me, to tell him, to give him guidance. But he didn't want my counsel either. So it didn't matter. That was one of those where I should have just done the psychic etiquette thing and just went, okay, I'm not going to let you know. You just go do you, and I'll do me. And we'll move on.
Well, that comes down to that free will thing where people still have free will. We can give them our advice, but they still have free will to do what they're going to do.
Exactly.
So, Julie, what do you do to, if you want to share this, how do you prepare for a psychic reading whenever it's a planned, scheduled psychic reading?
If I'm driving to the location, I'm contacting my spirit guides and I'm asking them to help me with the reading, to help me to be open, to help me to listen, and to help me be ready. Then when I get ready for the actual reading where I'm sitting there, I'm just asking to be at a state of openness and then really listening to spirit. Because what I'm really doing is just being a mockingbird, so to speak. I'm hearing spirit and I'm repeating.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all that I do, other than I just try and, I'm not very good at meditating, but I'm very good at speaking to spirit and just having conversations with them. So that's what I try to do, is listen to some music that I have specially set aside for readings and speaking to spirit.
I think that's a form of meditation.
Yeah, I agree too.
It's just that's what resonates and works for you. A lot of people can't do the close your eyes and be quiet for a while because they fall asleep.
And that's why I can't meditate. That's what happens to me.
Yeah. So gardening can be meditation. Listening to the appropriate music for yourself is meditation. So you actually are meditating, just Julie style.
Have you ever had a spirit want to go into your body to communicate with somebody? Have you ever had that try to happen? I can't think of the word for it.
Channeling.
Yeah.
I have not ever had that happen because I have boundaries set up beforehand. And I don't channel. That's not one of my gifts, so to speak. Or I don't allow that to happen. I just listen to my spirit guides and they're giving me the information, or spirit's giving me the information. It's either my spirit guides telling me what to say, or it's the spirit of the person telling me what to say.
Has that ever happened when you did the ghost tours? Because I know you used to do ghost tours that you recently retired from. Did any of that ever try to happen at that point in time, or do you protect yourself then as well?
I would usually protect myself then because we would go into some pretty haunted locations, and I didn't want to be influenced by what was going on in the spirit world while I was working, which is what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So giving the tours. So I would be grounded and protected before I would go into my job.
Well, Julie, what do you want to share? Is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I think that there are some negative connotations about that people think about psychic mediums. I think they think it's all woo-woo and they're afraid or discouraged by psychic mediums. And really, what every psychic medium does their thing a little differently. And the way that I do mine is more of a conversation. If you come to me as a psychic medium, we sit down and we have, I don't want to say a conversation, because I don't want you to tell me, like I said, everything that you know, because then I would be regurgitating it back and I'd be the most amazing psychic you'd ever met. But it is more in a conversational type of setting where I'm just talking to you and I'm having a conversation with you, a one-sided conversation. And then depending on what you want to talk about, we'll talk about what you want to talk about. I don't want people to be necessarily intimidated by going to a psychic medium, but you do have to do your research and make sure that you're going to one that is well known by people, one that is has a good reputation, and one that makes you feel comfortable. You shouldn't go to somebody that's not going to be a good fit for you, because then you're just not going to be getting the best out of the experience. I also encourage you to record your sessions, because you're going to be so interested in what's going on at the time that you may not be fully listening to what's happening at the moment. And some things that you're being told aren't going to make sense at the time, but may make sense later. And you won't remember what that is if you're not recording it.
Yeah, I always record mine when I get one done. I record when I'm getting a formal one, I'll record it. And what's interesting is like I've gone to the psychic fairs where you've got all these psychics set up, and Julie's participated in a few of those before. And it's really, as a psychic, you kind of pick up on who is really doing a good job and who isn't, so to speak, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, I sat down with one at a psychic fair, and I don't tell them I'm psychic. Yeah, and it's just kind of like I'm like, all but one picked up that I was psychic. The one that did not pick up I was psychic, I was getting bad reads on this person the whole time. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, and it's odd that that's what I kept getting was, you obviously make a living as a psychic. You're here at a psychic fair, but I mean, I don't know if maybe Spirit didn't want me to communicate with that person, or they didn't want me to, I don't know if Spirit was blocking something because of them. But have you had that situation, Julie, where you're just kind of like, I don't want to say charlatan, but you just get that read on someone at a psychic fair that's giving readings that, what are you doing? Either you shouldn't be here, or, is that just me being judgmental?
Well, I've run into people where I've thought, I think they're in this for the money and not in it for the greater good, which, yes, I charge money myself, but I would do it for free, but I've had numerous psychics tell me in order to be considered valid, you have to charge money. In order for people to take you seriously, you have to charge money. All this kind of stuff. So I do charge a fee.
Yeah, but you're not charging an exuberant amount.
No, I charge what people around me are charging. But I do have seen people who are in it for the money and go through the same routine of saying the same thing over and over and over to every person that sits down at the table. But I do see people who are in it for the right reasons, and those people tend to be very popular at the tables. Also, you have to worry about the people that are always telling you the doom and gloom. It's been my experience that most psychics don't tell you the bad things. I know I don't. I just don't get those messages. And I'm a little leery of those that are telling you about that type of information, giving you the information of, oh, so-and-so is going to die, or, you're going to have a lot of death this year, or, that type of information.
Well, that's information that doesn't serve them. I don't get things like that either, but even if I did, I wouldn't say anything because, I spoke before about, the guy I worked with that eventually passed away, that when I ran into him, I had goosebumps all over my body. The energy was crazy. And then, 2 days later, he had this horrible accident that changed his life forever and eventually died. And so since then, when I get that feeling, which has only been a few times, I don't say anything because I really don't understand the feeling, other than there's a lot of beings with them. They're surrounded by either angelic, whatever. But what would I say? Last time I had this feeling, someone died. So you don't want to give the information that could scare someone, because what's the point of that? That's not working from love.
That's correct. That's not working from love. And you have light workers, LIGHT workers. And that's what we are for the most part, hopefully. We're light workers where we're working from a place of love and light. And if you're telling somebody they're going to die, you're not working from a place of love and light.
Exactly. And I almost wonder if that's actually Spirit telling you something like that, because as a light worker myself, I've never had Spirit tell me anything bad. Now, they've told me to slow down. They've told me, no, don't do that. They've told me not go there. They've told me no, but they've never told me anything bad about, like something tragic about to happen to someone. And I think with the situation with this guy, I think it was just, I was picking up on whatever was with him. Because like we spoke before, your mom had 4 angels with her leading up to her passing. And so I believe that he had beings with him that were putting off so much energy that was giving me goosebumps, and I could feel them. Have you experienced anything like that?
I have not experienced anything like that. I have, working in the healthcare field, I have had people say that were getting ready to pass say, look at the angels, aren't they beautiful? And then within an hour, they've passed away. I've had things like that happen, but that's not a psychic thing. I don't believe that's just a thing that's getting ready to happen, and it's a spiritual thing that happens, but I don't think that's a psychic thing.
Well, no, what happened to me was a psychic thing because I was feeling all this energy off him that gave me goosebumps and everything.
Right. I think yours was a psychic thing. I think the people telling me this was them having a spiritual experience rather than a psychic experience.
You've never had that happen to you then?
I have not.
Okay.
No.
Curious. Well, we do different things. I'm just trying to figure out, what all can Julie do?
Yeah.
Might come in handy at the next family reunion, what can Julie do? It's funny that we were at Kim's house once for, I think it was Katrina's graduation from high school. And Mom didn't always like to admit about the psychic stuff. And Julie was doing a light reading for one of our cousins that was in attendance. And Mom would be like, is that what you're getting? Do you get that too to me? And I'm like, well, you don't believe in this. Why are you asking me? It's like, what are you asking what I'm getting? So I always thought that was funny because we get different things. Because you pick up on certain things that your guides want you to tell them, and then I might get something totally different. Doesn't mean we're both right or wrong. We're just getting different things.
That's correct. And one thing that always gets me is when people put me on the spot and say, read me now, when I haven't had a chance to
Prepare. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you read me now? And I'm like, no, I don't want to read you now. I mean, I can do it, but it's just.
Well, it's not a switch you can turn off and on at a drop of a hat because they're expecting a parlor trick.
Yeah.
And that's not what it is.
That's correct.
There's mindfulness. There's things that need to take place for you before you can actually tell them what they want to know.
I just think they get excited. Oh, it's a psychic medium.
Yeah, and I can read them on the spot. It's just that creates a lot of anxiety for me to do that.
So, Julie, how do you're doing a reading for someone and you have a walk-in that's not related to your person that wants to communicate? Has that ever happened to you?
That happens all the time because the way I describe it is like I'm a candle that lights and all the moths come to the flame. And I hate to refer to spirits as moths, but that's kind of the analogy that I use. I always tell somebody when I'm reading them, if I start describing someone that does not belong to you, tell me, and I will ask them to leave. And that's what I do. I ask them to step away or step off to the side and try and connect with somebody that is related to them. Because usually, if I'm reading somebody, it's at a psychic fair or there's other people around and there's dead people associated with them. So they like to step forward too because it's that moth to the flame type of thing. When I open up, they're like, oh, she can help me, or oh, she can see me, or oh, maybe she can tell my loved one this. And they just step forward. So that happens pretty regularly.
I figured that would be confusing, when instances when that happens. Do you belong here? Are you not supposed to be here? Who are you? Kind of thing. Since I don't do medium work, I was just curious about that. Now I have people talk to me. I've had loved ones come through, and I do notice that the more I acknowledge that, the more it happens. I don't think that that's really my path at this point in my life, but it does come through. And I had one woman that the entity was a mother that passed away with cancer at a young age, and she had a young daughter. And of course, I work with the daughter. And she was quite persistent. And finally, I'm just kind of like, okay, And I delivered the message, and she was just so happy she had someone that she could talk to. And I'm like, well, let's not make this a regular event. It happened one time and that was it, because wasn't going to go there. I didn't want her to come home with me either. It wasn't comfortable for me. So is it comfortable for you as you do this work? Because I know it's your calling, but is it just something you're totally comfortable with? Or are there times that you're just like, I don't want to deal with this now? I know it sounds kind of rude, but I mean, we all have bad days. So are there times that you're just like, have to send a spirit away because you just can't physically or mentally do it at that moment?
Well, I've gotten to the point where I can ground myself and put myself in protection and then just open up when I want to do a reading. The spirit has to be pretty persistent in order for me in order to get through that and have me do a reading that's just a cold read out in the public. So I don't necessarily have a lot of that, of what you're describing, unless I'm opening up and doing readings out in the public. For example, if I'm doing readings where I'm doing several readings in a day, I get to the point where I can't do one more reading because I'm just physically exhausted. But that's where I've signed myself up to do numerous readings in a day. And then I shut myself off and say I can't do another reading. But for the most part, I'm not necessarily bombarded by spirit anymore because I've learned how to control that and how to shut that off when I want to shut it off.
Well, this particular case, she's a friend of mine. And so I think it was because there's that friendship bond. And the mother had some very important stuff that needed to be conveyed that she needed to hear. So I think that's why it was such a situation there that I went ahead and did it. Yeah, it was just kind of, I felt, it's weird giving a message to a friend because you know them on a different level than just someone who's paying for a reading.
That's true. And I have several rules where I don't really read friends per se, and I definitely do not read family. And I don't read family for a couple reasons. One, they're family, and two, you know too much about them personally. So it's just difficult to read somebody that you already know way too much about.
Yeah, I don't think you can read family because you're so close. It's my experience. For me, I can't read y'all. I don't want to either, but when it gets farther outside or a close friend, usually that doesn't happen either. But it's kind of there because you don't want to invade someone's privacy.
Well, with my work being grief work for the most part, I do talk to people about their jobs and if they're going to move and finances and that kind of stuff, if that's what they want to talk about. I do that as well. But for the most part, mine is grief work. So my friends aren't normally going through grief and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I don't have to worry about that so much. Now, if they are going through some form of grief and they ask for a reading, I may do that, but it's a little tough. I had someone just, not yesterday, but the day before, text me a message, and this is a client of mine, and it was extremely uncomfortable because her brother-in-law is in a coma from a stroke, and she wanted to know if I could come and do a reading to see if he was still there, if he was still mentally there, and I'm like, no, I don't do that. One, because what if you're wrong? I mean, there's still that right brain, left brain thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if ego's there?
It's ego, yeah.
And two, I don't do that. I just don't do that. And so I told her, no, I don't do that. And she was fine with that. But just to ask somebody to do that, what I thought was pretty gutsy. But I could see in their desperation to want to know.
Needing to know, because
Yes.
there may have been a choice that needed to be made.
Yes.
Medically.
But don't ask the psychic.
Right.
I mean, some people might say, but you're psychic, you should know. Well, yeah, I may know, but it's not my responsibility to tell you, yes, turn the machine off, or yes, leave the machine on, or whatever. That's not my hula hoop.
And it goes again to what they have. A family has to make a decision like that as part of their path as well. You know what I'm saying? And maybe there's closure that needs to be made, or, when they're making these type of decisions, there's a process that's supposed to happen.
That's correct.
And then if they rely on you, the psychic, coming in, well, then they're not owning the decision. Well, she said that they're not doing the process. that they need to do for their path. It's basically saying, well, we're just going to blame the doctor, or we're just going to blame the psychic, or whoever's telling us to do this. But they need to, there's something they need to go through. As tragic as it is still something they need to do on their own.
That's correct.
Do you ever see anything besides people?
Do I see anything besides people?
Have you seen shadow? Have you seen animals? Have you seen elementals? Anything that's not previously human?
I
A person?
see animals when I'm doing readings. Sometimes there's an animal that's present that was very important to the person that I'm reading. Like I'll say, so and so is present and they have a dog with them, and they're like, "Oh, that's my dog, so and so," and they're excited or
sad.
or sad or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. I do see shadow figures. I have not seen elementals, but I know they exist. There's a whole array of things that could possibly exist that I've not seen. That's where I'm at with that. I see shadow people, and I do pick up on animals when I do readings.
Cool. I see animals all the time, especially my animals that have passed. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had elemental exposure, and it was until I figured out what it was a little confusing. It was an elemental, it was a male. It wasn't a male, but it came off as masculine, I guess is how I'm trying to say it. It was very powerful, and yeah, I accidentally ran into it literally, and yeah, I was not prepared for that kind of feel and that kind of energy. It was a piece of land that had a house built on it, so there was never as as far as anyone knew, a house had ever been on there. But the elemental was not happy with whatever happened on that ground where the house was built and everything. It was not happy. Only happened one time, and one time was enough. It's like,
I have seen some things that I don't know what they were, but I'm pretty sure they were elementals a couple of times, and it was very disturbing. The one that I did see. Well, actually, there were two that I had seen that were really disturbing, but the one I can still to this day see it peeking up over the side of a rock, a big rock, a boulder, looking over at me, and I can still see it to this day. Too bad I'm not an artist or I'd draw it, but it was a little unnerving. But I have seen a couple of them. Another one was dark.
I've heard that when an elemental is showing itself, it's looking for some sort of appeasement, like planting a tree or doing something to make them happy, something of nature.
Like an offering or something.
Yeah, like an offering that you're showing, and you make a production out of it that, I'm planting this for you because we're trying to take care of the land, and to show that, because if they're showing themselves, usually there's something that is not pleasing to them. That's the theory. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but that's the theory that I've heard about. That, if an elemental is showing itself, that there's something they're upset about, or they want something done. So if you make an offering to them of planting a fruit tree or planting something, that this is for them. This is yours. I'm planting this for you.
Way earlier in our conversation, you had said something about the hands. So you did experience the hands reaching up on the side of the bed?
I did.
That was so terrifying as a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when they were reaching for you as you were jumping out of bed. Oh, you didn't get them jump out of bed, though. You just screamed.
I just screamed.
Oh, no. I jumped and ran, and they reached.
Yeah.
What was that noise? Was that you, Carrie?
What noise? What'd you
I
hear?
heard a digital noise, like disconnecting and reconnecting.
No.
No? Okay. That was weird.
Don't believe it was me.
Okay. I got squirreled.
So Julie, what happens a lot of times is when Kim goes back and edits the episodes, we get weird things that show up. Sometimes it's footsteps. When I was at my old house, which was haunted, we get female voices. So I'm curious what we get out of your house since you and Kim are recording at your house for this episode. I'm curious if we get anything good in the editing process.
It'll definitely be interesting. So, are there any other things that you would like to talk to us about? I know that we experience things in totally different ways. Like, I can talk to Katrina in her head and she can send me messages back and stuff like that. Is there anything like that that you do? Or do you try to keep that shut off so you can talk to spirit?
I do try to keep that shut off so that I can talk to spirit. And it takes a lot of practice to do that because I'm constantly getting messages, even though I'm trying to stay grounded all the time and trying to stay in my protective circle and that sort of thing. I do constantly get messages, especially from my husband because we kind of share a brain.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to stay out of his head. I try not to let that affect me. Try not to let the messages affect me.
Was it hard for you to distinguish between that when you were first starting to develop your abilities, or that was nothing that you needed to
No, I
work
was
on?
pretty bombarded whenever I first opened up again.
Well, I have a funny story. I don't know if you remember. I don't remember if you remember this, Julie, but you had gone to a wedding with some friends, and I got invited to the same wedding reception at the last minute. So I was sitting with a bunch of people. We were a couple tables behind you. And I turned to my friend. I don't know why I did it. I said, watch this. And I was just staring at you. And I was going, Julie, turn around. Julie, turn around. And finally you turned around, went, what do you want? Do you remember that?
I do.
It was just kind of like, well, it's like I didn't know I could do it, but it was just kind of like, hey, watch this, And I was just like, Julie, you were just like, just shut up. What do you want? I thought it was kind of funny, but I didn't realize what I was doing at the time.
Yeah.
I just knew I could do it. You were not amused, by the way.
I was not amused. I was like, what
Yes.
do you want?
Leave me alone. I'm on a date.
Oh, that's funny.
That was back in high school type days, early 20s maybe.
Yes. Yeah. But it was just one of those words like, I was like, I'm going to be persistent and do this. Like any little sister would do to their big sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being a brat.
What? What? It was funny for me.
Personally, it put my mind at ease when Katrina was at college that we would send each other mental messages or psychic messages and respond in kind. So it made college much easier for me. I don't know how it made it for her, but it made it easier for me.
Get out of my head.
And now the bonus kid gets it every once in a while.
I'm sure you've had this happen to you, Julie, but you're talking to someone and you're just basically talking to them. You're not doing anything psychically. You're not getting anything, but you're talking and you give them some advice and they all of a sudden like, okay, now, are you psychically telling me this? Is someone telling you to tell me that? You're just kind of like, yeah, no, I'm just talking to you as a friend. Does that happen to you a lot?
It happens to me a lot. A lot. Like, are you
It's
getting
like
that psychically or are you just talking to me?
Don't you find that funny?
I do find that funny.
Because you could have some fun with it. Well, no, I'm not. I'm just talking to you.
Is that a woo-woo thing or is that just a normal people thing?
Normal people.
Normal people. Today we're normal peopling it, not woo-wooing.
But to us, the woo-woo is the normal thing.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. So I happen to know that when you go get a psychic reading, you like to not tell them you're psychic too.
That is correct. I had a psychic reading done in Sedona, which was very interesting because I did not tell the person I was psychic. And during the middle of the reading, she stops and she goes, "You're psychic?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "You're really psychic?" And I said, "Okay." And she says, "When we're done with this, I want you to read me." So I said, "Okay." So I had to read the reader.
And was she happy with the reading?
Yeah, she had lost her son,
Oh,
and
yeah.
she wanted me to read her for her about her son.
Do you have any funny stories, Julie,
Hmm.
pertaining to psychic abilities
Or even interesting stories, or
yeah.
a story that you didn't expect a psychic moment to occur and it did and it surprised you. Anything along those lines?
Guys are putting me on the spot.
We do that very well.
Yeah, so we do it to each other all the time.
Yes, we do.
Why should you be different? Welcome to the podcast.
Exactly.
I really can't think of any.
I know I know for me, like, weird situations is when you see a ghost dog and you walk around it or you step over it and there's people around
Oh,
and you're getting that look like, what are you doing? Nothing. But it's like, oh, but you see it and your response is you wouldn't, if it was a live animal, you would step over it or go around anyway. But they're like, I've done that, and then people just kind of like look at you funny, like, wait, what did you? It's like, sorry, there was a ghost dog. Didn't want to step on it.
I trip over the cats in the house that appear. I literally trip over the cats, the ghost cats.
mm-mm.
They tangle up at my feet.
Are they running past you, or they just happen to appear when you're walking?
Well, I will be, for example, a good example of that is I'll be in the kitchen cooking dinner and I will turn around because the cats always hung out in the kitchen with me whenever I was cooking. And I would turn around and take a step and the cat is right there, like it would have been alive. And I would trip. I just tried to avoid the cat that was right under my feet. Then they would disappear, like, ha ha, got her again, kind of thing.
Made her do it again.
Yep. Could be why I'm having problems with my knee now. You never know.
Tripping.
Tripping over ghost cats.
Yep.
The stepping over the ghost animals. I think that when you see an entity and you're someplace, because not all my friends know that I'm psychic, and they don't need to know. I just I let my circle know, my people know that I'm psychic. But I've got friends that you just know they're so closed off to even considering that's a good thing that you just don't tell them. But then when you're around them, it's and you're getting stuff, and you're like, you might see that entity right there, and you're like, I'm ignoring you, kind of thing. Yeah, it can get kind of amusing sometimes, don't you think?
Well, yes, I've had some readings where I've had a couple people sit down and their arms are crossed and they just sit there. And you're like, why did you want a reading to begin with? You're not even receptive to a reading. You paid your money and you sit there. And in those cases, if I'm not getting anything and I can't really read them, I give them their money back. I say, it was nice to meet you. Here's your money back. I'm not getting anything where I can read you. Because, they've got to be open to the reading in order for there to be an exchange of energy where I can read them. But it's like they sit there and with their arms crossed and this scowl on their face, and
They're daring you.
it's like, let's see what you got. It's like, well, you're willing to pay money to see what I got? It's like, it's your money.
Yeah.
So sometimes I give it back, sometimes I don't. It just depends. But there's been times when I've gotten absolutely nothing, and I'll say, I'm just really sorry, I can't pick anything up, and I give them their money back. I probably shouldn't say that on the air, but there's times when I'm just like, I just can't. There's times when,
Well, there are times you can't.
yeah, there are times when it's like a blank slate. I get absolutely nothing. And I'm just like, I can't, in a good conscience, take your money and give you their money back and say, see you later. Now, I did have an interesting reading one time where it was a young high school girl who came, and beautiful young girl. And she was cutting and just very depressed and was being bullied. And I had a reading with her, and Spirit gave me several things to tell her. She showed back up a year later, and she said, I don't know if you remember me or not, and she went over the reading with me, and she said, I did everything that you told me to do, which of course it wasn't me telling her to do it, it was Spirit. And she said, and everything got better. And she said, and I'm a different person now. And her whole countenance was better, and she said she's doing better in school, and the bully left her alone. And, she just changed everything. She worked hard to change everything that Spirit told her to change, and she was a whole new kid. So, I mean, sometimes there's really those great stories where you get to see that change, and then, but most of the times you don't, if it's one of those situations where it's that kind of a reading.
Right. Well, she was meant to come back to let you know
Yeah.
that what you're doing is for a bigger purpose.
Yeah. It was really rewarding to see the change in her. And she was a beautiful girl. But, and we talked about how bullies are just when somebody bullies you, it's out of jealousy normally. She was just a really lovely girl and a beautiful, a physically beautiful girl. So you could see why somebody would bully her because she was just really but she was one of those that was caught in between having a group,
Mm-hmm.
and she just didn't have her people yet.
Right.
And your people are so important, and I love how they show up for you. That you meet someone and all of a sudden you think, oh yeah, these are one of my people. Okay. It just is really nice when you run into your people because you could just be natural in yourself. Regardless if you're psychic or not, it's your people, and your tribe is going to accept you no matter what. So it's always good to put those boundaries up to get rid of the ones that don't serve you, and then get your tribe.
I think that was an excellent example of helping someone and them coming and letting you know that what you're doing is worthwhile. A lot of times you don't see that ending.
And I think that you do so much grief work too.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have young people once in a while where there aren't dead people associated with them. Or because I get some people that sit down and want a reading and they've never had anybody die. So then that's a whole different range of a reading, which I'm not always used to doing. It's like, okay, now's the time we talk about school or the money or the job or the house or whatever they want to talk about. The what I consider typical psychic reading type
Mm-hmm.
stuff that people want to know.
I had an experience with a student in high school. Actually, I think she was in junior high. I used to make costumes for the musicals at the school, and I was more or less there all the time helping the backstage stuff happen. And this one girl and we had a connection. She would always come over and talk to me and stuff and everything. And then just one day when I walked into the rehearsal, I just felt the need I needed to go talk to her. I needed to go see what was happening because I felt the need to be there next to her. And I was just talking and asking her just general questions. How you doing? What's going on? And she had a tablet with her, and it was a drawing type tablet, and she had drawn a picture of what would be herself, and she was doing the cutting thing, exactly what you were talking about. And she was doing the cutting, and every time she did that cut on that picture that she made, I felt it. And I was like, oh, this is not good. I just knew. I told her, I said, well, you know what? You're going to have a really good day of practice today. And we just kind of talked, and she put it down, and we did a little more talking, and then her rehearsal went fine. But after the rehearsals, when I went to I knew I was supposed to tell the director that she needed help. So they ended up getting her help. They didn't realize that she hadn't advanced to the physical cutting yet, but she needed the help to get her out of that. The next time I saw her, she happy kid. I feel that was a psychic connection with her, needed to be addressed.
It's so heartbreaking when you see young people and they're struggling and going through these type of situations. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Kids are growing up in a totally different world than when we grew up. I can't imagine. I mean, you have social media where you can't get away from a bully. Or whatever thing they're going through, whether it's a mental health crisis or whatever. It's just really sad. It's heartbreaking that anybody goes through those kind of situations. It's just breaks my heart, makes it hurt. You know, we had talked earlier, Julie, about sometimes when someone's closed off, yeah, you can't get a reading on them. My very first reading I had, it was really funny. Didn't know what to expect. I was early in my development stages as a psychic, and she said that no, she goes, well, all of your dad's family are lined up, and no one's talking. No one wants to talk. No one's coming forward. And I thought that was interesting because I mean, I could see why. I mean, knowing the family, but no one wanted to talk. No one wanted to come forward. And then on the other side, mom's family was lined up, and of course, grandma and the great aunts were talking to her all at the same time, which was normal when they were alive. But I just thought it was interesting that not always do the spirits want to talk.
That is true. And I find that a lot, that I will get not the person that they want to hear from will come forward. So, like, they want to hear from their mother, but their mother doesn't come forward, someone else does. And they're like, but I want to hear from my mother. And I'm like, but they're not coming forward. Well, why aren't they coming forward? Well, I have no idea why they're not coming forward. I can only speak to whoever's coming forward.
You can't make them.
I have had instances where someone has come forward that the person did not want to speak to, and I've had to ask that person to step back, and they're like, I don't want to speak to that person. And there were reasons why they didn't want to speak to that person. That's happened on occasion too. Like, I definitely don't want to speak to that person. Make them go away. And I've had to ask that person to step back.
Now, do you think that if the person that comes to, because you do a lot of grief work, I mean, that's the majority of what your work is, do you think that when someone is locked in grief, that that interferes with the reading as well?
Locked in grief is kind of a tricky thing. I don't know that I've come across very many people that are locked in grief, because most of the people that I've encountered have transitioned already. So I really can't answer that question.
I'm not talking about the spirit, I'm talking about the client. If the client's locked in grief.
Oh, the client is locked
The
in grief.
client, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. They're not difficult to read. They're just wanting to hear things that I can't give them. Like, I can tell them what spirit is saying, but that's not what they want to hear. It's more of what happens. Say they want to hear from their husband, and their husband comes through, and I tell them what their husband says, but that's not what they want to hear. You know, the husband may say, for example, I have a client that is really locked in grief, and their client wants them to start dating again. You need to move on, start dating again. And this person's like, oh, I'll never do that. Oh, I could never do that. And this person is so locked in grief they can't even make it through the day without crying. And it's been like 4 years.
Wow.
So they're still locked in that stage of grief where they cry every day. So they can't even fathom the thought of dating or moving on, even though the spouse is saying it's been long enough, you need to start moving on. And they're like, oh, look, I can never do that.
Yeah, when you've transitioned, you have a totally different mindset. You know, what things that were important when you were walking the earth are no longer important. And I think it's hard for us to put our hands around that they're wanting you to date because they understand. They want you happy.
Correct. But this person is also in a not processing grief in a normal way.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think that's common. That happens quite commonly. That people can get so locked in grief that because it's a lot to process. We all grieve differently when mom transitioned. We all had to go our own ways through the process, and they didn't always weren't the same for any of us, because we're different individuals. But we had to go through that process. It's hard when you find someone locked in grief because it's very sad.
It is sad, but I think that sometimes they're there because they like the feeling or they're used to that feeling and not wanting to get rid of that feeling of the grief.
It's comfortable for them because it's what they know now.
It's comfortable. It's what they know now. Yeah. And they don't want to let go of that because that's where they're at. And they want to stay there. They're not ready to move up and on and to brighter things.
There's a lot of truth in that.
Okay, so let's get a bright side before we end this episode. We went down, down, down again.
And I hate it when we do that.
When you work with grief.
That happens.
Yeah. So I did want to hit on one thing that, because Carrie already is, but you are working on Reiki?
Yes. I've been through the first course of Reiki, and I'm getting ready to do the second course of Reiki within the next 6 months or so. So then I use that a lot in my practice because I do, like I said, a physical piece of the reading. When I read people, I look at their physical aspects, see what's kind of going on, and that helps with Reiki helps with that.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see where that would really help you focus in on whatever is happening with that person.
I find that with Reiki, because you can only give it to someone who wants it, but I find that it works really well, especially on myself, giving myself Reiki. And I think sometimes I get out of the habit of it, that because it's energy work and it just really helps. But I think after like a day of a lot of readings, that would be the perfect time to give yourself Reiki, because you've got to be so exhausted mentally, physically, spiritually from your day, that I think giving yourself Reiki would be a wonderful treat.
Yeah, and I use Reiki in a little bit of a different way. I'm not using it to heal people. I'm using it, the energy of it, to course through and pick up on things. So I'm using it in a little bit of a different way.
It's very interesting. Okay, so Julie, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
The ways that people can contact me, I will give to you if you would put it on your website.
Sure.
If anybody wants a reading, I'd be happy to do readings.
And they don't.
And this is phone readings, correct?
I'm getting set up to do phone readings.
Okay. Or they could reach you at an email address that I'll put on Facebook. Okay.
So, Julie, how did it feel being on a podcast with your two younger sisters grilling you?
It felt just fine.
Personally, I'm glad this recording is going well, considering what we went through with the last one. Because this is take 2 for you.
Yeah, for me.
Yes. And it was so, that happens. It's so Mercury retrograde. That's not the first time this has happened to us. So, but it's hard because we had such a good episode, and everything flowed, on this one as well. But you're kind of in the back of your mind going, "Oh gosh, I hope this is working. Oh gosh, I hope this is working."
I'm watching it happen on the screen, so I think we're good.
Okay, perfect.
For now.
Perfect.
All right. Okay, so I think that's going to wrap up this episode. What do you think, Carrie?
I think so. Unless Julie, you have anything else?
No, nope. I'm good.
All right. Well, yes, I think that is the end of this episode. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you have any questions or anything that you'd like to email us about, or reach out to us on Facebook, or any questions on how to contact Julie, reach out to us. You can reach out at Psychic Bent Podcast on Facebook. And Kim's going to give us the email because I don't like to give the one.
It's psychicbent1@gmail.com.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. May your light shine bright.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast, Psychic Bent. If you enjoyed Psychic Bent, please like, follow, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We can be reached on Facebook at Psychic Bent Podcast. Our email address is psychicbent1@gmail.com. May your light shine bright.